Welcome to the Perfect Place to Put a Practice podcast by Scott McDonald and DrDemographics.com, the best source of demographic, psychographic, and marketing information for professionals.
Hello, my name is Scott McDonald and I represent Dr. Demographics. And what we're going to do in this episode today is talk about demographics, what makes for a favorable site. Now I'll start with this note. Not everybody considers everything favorable, or at least the same criteria may not be good for all doctors. One doctor that I knew was looking for a place near a ski school where his Olympic athlete daughter would want to get her training throughout the year, and he thought finding a place that would work under those circumstances was great. Well, I found out in that particular case there are very few places to go. Well, so far so good. The idea, though, is to find out what you need and what you want in the population that you're hoping to find, and then to build the practice upon that patient-based type that would be a good idea. Whether age or religion or gender or whatever might be important is unique to your particular circumstance. Now, for more than 30 years, I've researched locations for professional practices. Always the goal is to find favorable sites, but it has to be favorable according to what you're looking for. The more specific you can be on those aspects of the population, their demographics, the more helpful I can be in finding the site that is going to work for you. If you need a lot of new growth, need people of a particular age or religion or demographic character, that's great. But if you're not specific, you'll wind up getting more of it or less a generic type site. Now, remember, in spite of what many doctors think, the goal is not to find a location without competition. Sometimes the very best locations are those that have lots of people as competitors now. If you find places where there is no competition, that's really a formula for failure. It's a sign that no one else will like the location either. Now, let me give you some examples. In the last century, practice sites were historically considered ideal when they were surrounded by large daytime populations. These are sites that had many workers or residents in the daytime. Most practices get their patients during daylight hours. Places with large nighttime populations are considered residential and are generally not desirable, but if that's what you need, we can find you a place that has them. In America, access to the site was paramount via surface streets. So in short, we wanted to get there quickly and leave our cars nearby, and to do so cheaply. So we have to find places to park. Access to the office and a place to leave your car, assuming that most people are driving, is a very important demographic characteristic. Now, in America, access is paramount, and generally people want to come to the office via service streets. Places with large nighttime populations are considered residential and not desirable. In America, access to the site was always paramount, but not just any access will do. They generally have to be accessible by surface streets. So we want to get to the office that you are offering your services, quickly, and to leave our cars nearby and cheaply. So therefore, one of the characteristics of an ideal population might be cheap parking that is secure near your site. I think you get the point. In short, we want to get there quickly leave our careers nearby, and do so without having to spend a lot of money. Many of the most promising cities in the old days were dependent on gas street lamps. Now remember, that at the time was a new technology. Automobiles may have been only for the rich. But America is a nation and was a nation of early adopters. Otherwise, folks walked to their doctor or hired a rig if necessary. Thus, a place that was in walking distance of their residence was considered premium. But that's not true anymore, especially if you go to New York or Los Angeles. People generally believe they're going to have to park their car, and they're fine with that. Now, when a patient wanted the best quality care possible, they figured the best offices for innovation were located near university campuses, always on busy streets, by the way, and thus the urban practice became popular. Now, there are some people who want discount services and they don't care about getting the best quality. That in itself is a demographic characteristic that will matter a lot to some people and not much at all to others. Now, in urban areas, special consideration was made for private practices and neighborhoods with several offices, many of which has access to specialists. So if you look in an urban area, you'll know that there are a lot more specialists generally than not in more suburban type locations. They were both popular and practical to have proximity to each kind of office. Keep in mind, medical development or equipment, drugs, dental suppliers, and other characteristics of the best sites had a very close relationship with their clients and proximity to the referral base that needed help. Scientific sessions reinforced the symbiosis with practices. Keep in mind, dosages and prescriptions were closely held secrets back in the early days, but shared neighbors and friends were considered to be a desirable fact. So if you found a dental center, a place where the best would go and pay a premium for their services, that was generally considered a positive aspect. Lots of people in urban areas are still in that mindset, but others prefer, well, places that are a little less expensive, maybe. Now, these were always places of education in urban areas. So you look for places near schools. Dosages and prescriptions were closely held secrets and shared among friends. Therefore, Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, and St. Louis were the center of gravity for medical world cutting-edge technology and advancements. It's not quite so anymore. So dental suppliers, pharmacists, and suppliers are not having to be in close proximity to each other. However, there are services, and I'll put pediatric oncologists in one example. You don't want to travel to many places. You want to find one that will meet your particular needs and make your determination on how desirable the site you'll be going to will be. The use of the private vehicle spelled the beginning of the end of the urban practice. They could draw from a much larger area than a city core, but personal contact was lost as the patient rolls, in other words, their numbers increased. No longer was public transportation necessary to make a practice viable. Equipment and procedures were much more standardized as well. competition from other doctors and practices was more keen. And then we talk about the busyness crisis. The business crisis was greatly changed the way that doctors practiced and created patients. The number and type of the competition was recalculated and greatly modified as well. Now practices can thrive in an area thought traditionally too small to be viable. Remember, urban areas, urban practice sites, had a big advantage because their population numbers were so much larger. They had a big potential patient base. There are several headwinds facing urban areas and sites, such as the time it takes to get to the office. One writer calls them our little challenges. Well, that may be very hard, but it's a fact that urban sites can be a little more selective because they have so many people crammed together in a small geographic area. Perhaps the toughest are the ever-rising costs of residential, professional, and retail rates on leasing. So in other words, you may have a very large patient base, but you're going to be paying a great deal of money for the space to have your practice. All practice sites are more expensive in urban areas. A practice must be immediately profitable to make their bottom line. In a rural or even a suburban location, that is not required. You can have a fairly focused practice type. You may pay a lot for that to get the people you want, but the site itself is being selective on who can come into this area to receive care. In urban areas, buying property is going to be nearly impossible. Now, I recommend that you consider urban areas if you have a very specialized subspecialization and are therefore serving a large population. But COVID, traffic, and crime have made fewer people want to go downtown at all. So right now, as a demographer, I'm telling you, most of the people who come to an urban area are different than the average person who lives in that area. And their reasons for wanting to be there may be that they do not want to travel great distances to seek care from an expert, and they want a certain level of expertise and care that is greater than what you're going to find from the average doctor. If you don't meet that criteria, I rather suggest you go to a suburban or even a rural site. Now, lately, urban sites have consistently lost population. According to the latest census, New York City, for example, has lost 468,299 residents between 2020 and 2022. That is about 5.3%. Now, for context, remember this: Miami has only 449,514 residents, and New York City had lost almost as many residents overall. What I'm saying is, it's becoming hard to practice in a big city setting. Other big losers are Chicago with 81,313 lost population, Los Angeles with 76,529, and San Francisco significantly has lost 65,522. That is about 7.5% of its population. Now, unless these cities change their leadership and reverse course, these rates of loss are going to accelerate. These are serious losses in production in the end. So I'm saying, yeah, I like it fine just being in a big city. I can tell you what big cities and what neighborhoods within these big urban areas are going to have the best likelihood of success. But I will tell you unapologetically, you're swimming upstream and it's going to be harder. So unless you are a super specialist, it will not be a good idea for you to go there. Now, why has this happened? In every case, it seems that urban mayors and their voters are responsible for this loss in population. The middle class was forgotten and ignored. By contrast, suburbs are cheaper and they're growing in size and profitability much faster. If you want to know where potential growth is occurring in your type of practice, may I recommend the Practice Viability Report, which we offer. Sample reports are free if you go to our website in the drop-down menu. So if you want something specific, Dr. Demographics can help you with it. But I'll tell you, it's not a thing for the faint of heart. Now, some demographers see a pushback occurring. In May 2023, a fellow by the name of Aaron M. Wren in New Geography magazine, which is for demographers, wrote an article that was called "Cities Are Dying, but they aren't dying, but they face challenges." And this is an opposing view from what I have. Now, I'm doing this to tell you what the other side is saying. He wrote, "You've probably read about growing urban crime or seen disturbing videos such as when a group of teens and young adults are running amok in Chicago, for example. You've probably heard about how remote work is threatening the future of downtowns, with half or more of workers not coming into the office anymore. You probably heard about the population exodus from urban areas or centers during COVID, and about population drops in formerly booming places like San Francisco and Oakland." He goes on, "This drumbeat of bad news seems to have created a sense among some cities that they're doomed. There's certainly a class of people who would welcome this, and so they're motivated to share all the bad news and emphasize the ways that big cities are in big trouble. However, I'd love to encourage people to have a sense of perspective here. The very nature of the news cycle, which says if it bleeds, it leads, selects for bad news. So in other words, if it's not growing, or if there's bad news in an urban area, they'll certainly run those stories. It's very easy for people without a ground knowledge to draw conclusions that may not be warranted." Now, Wren does not agree with me. I believe that I can look at the demographics of the state and say it's not a cliche if people aren't moving there. I know that San Francisco, there are lots of stories that have come out about San Francisco. In fact, every major city has had lots of stories about how the homeless are taking over the town. And you may assume, well, what's the other side seem to say? Well, Wren represents those people. But I can tell you demographically and anecdotally, it's true. Urban areas are suffering, and I don't want doctors to have a hard time making a profitable practice out of an area that is really marginal to begin with. Now, Wren and people like him are urban apologists. They really have a significant difference of opinion, he and I. Now, perhaps our biggest difference is an urban policy. He sees that things are really not all that bad. Urban mayors, he says, see that they have much more potential for growth than I do. Whereas I think property taxes are a net negative on growth, he and these mayors see it as a net positive to guide urban development. In short, if they have lots of taxes, they have a lot of potential to put new streets in or put up new buildings. I see it as a top-down intrusion on popular political will. The cities need to invest in the people to get crime down and to build up education that leaves unions in more of a support role than one that needs policy. Let me just review something. I'm not anti-union. I think, however, that unions often form a negative impetus concerning growth and new residents in an area. Where they are strong, they often weaken cities. Not always, but often. In my observation, urban practices will not lead the way in practice development because costs and crime are rising, well, exponentially. For that reason, I look for sites of lower density and cost to lead the way to the world of professional practice office locations. Now, at this time, I look at what they call the near city professional practice growth. These are places that may not be far from where those traditional good places were, where the employment was big and where there were lots of people living. But I see that until things change, it's going to be a headwind, and you are going to suffer as a result of it. Now, I do have a note to give on runaway theft. Particularly in urban areas, theft and violence has been unknown in professional practice. So in other words, you can say, hey, look, I'm a dentist. I'm a general physician. I'm a pediatric professional. Well, embezzlement has been known to happen, but due to the nature of the goods and services that professionals keep on hand, outright theft has been thought to be relatively rare in healthcare. Perhaps we should revisit our assumptions, however. Are some places in greater risk due to the major theft that we're seeing in trends in the downtown areas? Frankly, I only know for certain that an environment of crime has increased the demand for healthcare practice security. I'll give an example. Drugs are always considered the greatest risk, in other words, controlled substances and prescription pads in healthcare practices. You got to lock them up as never before. But other targets of theft are increasing, such as dental gold and silver. Numbers are unreliable or soft. So wrongful credit transactions are really risky in theory, but there is an attitude that we can justify that. I do not have a global view of the problem, I confess. So I'm not one of those security consultants who says white-collar crime, embezzlement, is going to be your greatest concern. There are experts who can do that. But I'm just seeing that within some areas, the statistics show embezzlements are going up, theft of very expensive materials and equipment is going up, and we have to be cautious of those locations. Anecdotally, it is an issue that doctors should guard against, and it is more prevalent in some places than others. I can say that generally is true, but I can't say San Francisco is a cesspool when it comes to theft or crime. However, in times past, police and sheriff's departments published a crime index on their neighborhoods. Due to pushback from city and county officials, they are no longer putting out these numbers in all places. It made them look bad to report these statistics. So major urban areas are no longer telling people where there is a lot of crime. So even if you're looking for it, you won't find it in the databases. Demographics have had to start using anecdotal rather than statistical evidence of crime and violence in these localities. Now, just so you know, this data is divided between crimes against property and crimes against people. I can generally tell you easier what the crimes against property are in a particular area. The crimes against people tend to be lacking. Formerly, this data was published in the police blotter. So you know every county and every city had a police blotter that reported incidents of crime, and you could track that. But I'm saying there is a real movement in demographics to stop that from occurring. Dr. Demographics still has data on crime, and I still have available to me information that if you're looking at the risks involved in going to a particular site, you need to have that data. Doctors are waking up to the fact that their patients, many of whom are elderly and infirm, may desire an escort to their vehicles or to a pickup site. Not everybody, certainly true, but there are places it's becoming more and more popular. They might welcome this service even if they have to pay for it out of pocket. Urban areas can seem intimidating to some patients, it is true. In suburban sites or retail locations, this might not need to be an option, but you may be surprised how many people there are when you offer a patient survey who talk about wanting to have a little, safety that they didn't demand before. Are some places in greater risk due to theft and crime? Frankly, we only know for certain that an environment of crime has increased the demand for healthcare practices security. Drugs are already considered the greatest risk for controlled substances and prescription pads for healthcare practices, but other targets of theft are increasing, such as dental gold and silver, as I mentioned before. Numbers are unreliable or soft. What I mean is, statistically, we can't say with reliability what the percentage of the growth year to year is being in a particular neighborhood. Wrongful credit transactions are extremely risky in theory, but not everybody has them. And there is an attitude that seems to justify it. And as I said before, I don't have a global handle on it, on the problem. But I know anecdotally it is an issue doctors should guard against, and it is more prevalent in some places than others. So, when you get a demographic report, the practice viability does have a component of crime against property and against people in a particular location. That's why I recommend it. The marketing report is also a tool that you may want to use to test your risk and the potential liability. Please take a look at our sample reports at drdemographics.com or give us a call at 800-849-0499. There has never been a time in which you need statistics to back up your risks and to help your patient base than right now. If people know you care and you're taking steps to keep them safe, I think that is going to be more and more greatly appreciated in any urban area that you go to. This is Scott McDonald. Thank you for watching, and I hope we can help you. Bye-bye.